Hello and welcome to another episode of Cut It One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay. And if this is your first time here, welcome. If you're a returning subscriber, that is awesome. Good to see you again. All right, so let's get right down to it. So, periodically, okay, since I started this channel, you sort of ask yourself as a content creator, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And not in the like, oh, I'm regretting it sort of way, but in the sort of like, I want to keep focused on what motivated me to go from not creating content to creating content. What was one of the motivating factors? And for me, it was with all the hype about Rings of Power and the show and the sort of war that was going on within Tolkien fandom as well as between like some fans and Amazon and the mainstream media and stuff like that. I wanted to throw my hat in the ring and sort of side with the fans that are like, hey, you're butchering this, and you need to stop butchering this. There's a reason why this is like one of the most beloved tales to come out of the 20th century. Okay, so that was my motivation. My motivation initially, and seeing how Hollywood has sort of adopted this tactic of the minute fans vocally criticize something, they get labeled with terms like ist and phobe and all these other things to sort of shut down any sort of discussion or debate as to the validity of what Hollywood is pumping out. That's what motivated me to sort of want to start to be vocal about this whole thing. And I saw an article today. I was just doing my usual looking through, different sites and stuff like that. And I came across an article today which sort of to me embodies the one of the things that motivated me to start this channel. And it was this how the mainstream media, or as we will refer to it going forward, shill media, will either put out some bastardized version of what they consider the lore, or just flat out get it wrong. Just flat out tell the reader things that are wrong. And I'm in this particular case when it comes to Tolkien stuff, I think it's because they're aiming at a audience that may not be as familiar with it. Again, like I mentioned when their Nielsen numbers came out, about the audience they were getting was 35 plus, meaning that that audience had previous experience with Tolkien in one form or another, either from the books directly or through the Peter Jackson movies. It's also why the show was panned across the board by fans. I think it's sitting at a 39 on Rotten Tomatoes. And so their goal was to, because again, being an independent filmmaker, I know a little bit of how this works. Their goal was to get a younger audience, to get that 18 to 35 audience, because they're younger. They tend to have more, I don't want to say disposable income, but they tend to be more willing to dispose of their income, if you were, i.e., buy merch, so on and so forth. Whereas a 35 plus audience may actually have more disposable income because these are people that are older, further along in their careers, they have savings and so on and so forth. But they also tend to be very knowledgeable about the things that they're willing to spend on. So they were trying to go for a younger audience, and now in the what I would consider, we are in the post-mortem phase of season one of Rings of Power. You're seeing a lot of these articles come out where they try to explain things like, oh, the Rings of Power, it does a good job of explaining this or fixing something, as if Tolkien needed fixing. And yes, there was an article I did see. I'm not even sure if I'm gonna do a video on that because it's just so insulting. But anyway, I saw this one, which was sort of embodies how they either misinterpret information, flat out give you wrong information, or they sort of muddy it up in such a way that you're just kind of like, well, it's very confusing. I'll just take your word for it. Okay, so this is what I found today. It's actually from 18 hours ago. It is on Screen Rant, and it's an article by Emily Clute. Okay, and it says Rings of Power explains why the elves leave Middle Earth in the Fourth Age. Emily, they don't leave Middle Earth in the Fourth Age. They leave Middle Earth at the end of the Third Age, i.e., the Fourth Age is the age of men. the elves have left. The elves leave at the end of the third age. It's things that happen is the ring of power, Sauron's ring, is destroyed. Sauron's plans are defeated. Okay, the king of Gondor, okay, and the descendant of kings, Aragorn, becomes the new king of Gondor, and it is now the time of men. Okay, with that, the elves leave. They leave at the end of the third age. They don't leave in the fourth age. Now, you could say, well, there's a time period from when the one ring gets destroyed until the elves leave, and there is a time period that takes place. It doesn't happen like the same day, okay? But it's not the age of men until the last of the elves is gone. So anyway, let's get into this because I want to sort of highlight a couple of things. And Emily says, the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power, provides an explanation for the elves' migration from Middle Earth in the Fourth Age. Again, wrong. It's at the end of the Third Age. In the original Tolkien lore, the elves were beckoned by the Valar to leave Middle Earth and seek out the blessed realm of Valinor. Okay. Weary from centuries of battling evil and fearing the inevitable fating, the elves left the lands of Middle Earth for the future of men and dwarves after the destruction of the One Ring. Mm. Okay, that's not the worst of it. We'll The Rings of Power Season 1 ending helps to explain a significant cause of the elves' exodus. The crafting of the three elven rings, imbued with the power of mithril, bullshit, no, halted the blight afflicting the Tree of Valinor and the inevitable fading of the elven kind. Stop. Let's stop right there. First of all, the elven rings, all three rings are not made with mithril in the lore, according to Tolkien. They are not. Only one is. Nenya is made with mithril, and that's the ring that Galadriel has. Okay? The other rings, Narya and Vilya, okay? Narya is literally described as being made of gold. Okay? The third one, Vilya, they never actually say what Vilya is made of. So you have one that's made of mithril, okay, Nenya. You have Narya made of gold. The third one, we don't know, but clearly it wasn't mithril or gold. Okay, so right out of the gate, this is wrong. That saying imbued with the power of mithril. No, that's not it. And saying halted the blight afflicting the tree of Valinor and the inevitable fading of elven kind. The elves don't fade because of a tree. It has nothing to do with it. Okay, and the rings. Okay, the rings are initially create. The elven rings are created to sort of prevent decay and to preserve nature and Middle Earth in the way that it is currently. That their design is to stave off decay and rot, basically. Okay, which is why Galadriel uses them for in Lothlorien, and Elrond has one, and he's using it in Rivendell, and it's why if you read the books, there's such a sort of it's almost like this uneasy feeling that the hobbits get while they're in these places because it's the effects of time being messed with because the rings, okay, are designed to sort of slow down the ravages of time and to protect sort of Lothlorien and Rivendell from growing old and withering, okay, which is why when Frodo shows up in the story, Galadriel says to him, you know, your coming is as the footsteps of doom to us. Okay, because if you succeed if you fail in your destroying of the ring, we will be laid bare, and our defenses will be laid bare before the enemy, right? Because the if they use the ring, and they have been using the rings, Sauron will now have the One Ring and will know where they are and what they're doing and how to defeat them. But then she also says And if you succeed, basically the power of the rings will fade, Lothlorien will grow old and be swept away in time. Okay? Because the once the one ring is destroyed, the other rings will lose their power, okay? And eventually their ability to keep Lothlorien the way it is or keep Rivendell the way it is will fade over time, and those places will eventually decay and be swept away in the sands of time. So it has nothing to do with afflicting the tree of Valinor, and it definitely doesn't have anything to do with the elves fading, and we'll get into it. However, the destruction of the One Ring in the Third Age would remove this magical safeguard, as the Elven rings would no longer hold their power. Okay. With this saving grace destroyed and the tree once more afflicted, the elves would be forced to leave Middle Earth for good upon the coming of the Fourth Age. Not true. The Elven rings were the first three rings of power created under Sauron's guidance with the power to heal and preserve. That is patently false. They were the last rings created before the One Ring. So the seven that the dwarves get, the nine that the men get, were all created first. Then the three elven rings were created, and then Sauron created his one ring. Now, what separates the three elven rings from the other ones, Sauron's not directly involved in the creating of the elven rings. Celebrimbor and his smiths do that on their own. However, the techniques they used were learned by Anatar, who was Sauron, okay? And that's why the rings are still bound to a certain degree with the One Ring, because the techniques were the same. But Sauron did not have a hand in creating the Elven rings, and the Elven rings were the last rings created before the One Ring, not the first, as the show says and as this article says. Okay, so that's flat out wrong, just straight up wrong. You could look it up in the book. It is flat out wrong. The last one, the ruling ring, had the ability to bind and control all the rings of power. Yeah, to a certain degree. The destruction of the One Ring by Frodo in the Third Age led to the fall of Sauron, yes, because the One Ring held dominion over those beneath it. The rings of power lost their own power. Okay, fair enough. Yes, that is sort of implied that when the one ring is destroyed, the other rings lose their power. So I can't argue that point. While the elves were the first to become wise to Sauron's intentions, they did use the rings to their advantage during his absence. See, and this is where one of the things I was talking about, where these people, they sort of play fast and loose with what they're telling you, and they don't get it right, and it's in subtle ways. They say that they used the rings in Sauron's absence. Not true. They use the rings when Sauron is very much around, while they know he's in Mordor, okay, and he's building his army. They use the rings because they know that Sauron does not possess the One Ring. Therefore, Sauron cannot know what they're doing. Their use of the rings, Sauron has no idea because he doesn't possess the One Ring. Okay, so he's there. There's no absence of Sauron. Sauron is there. He just hasn't found the One Ring yet. So that's what allows them to use the Elven rings. Um, with the One Ring destroyed for good, however, the three Elven rings no longer provided the protections they once did. Kind of true. Yeah, mostly true. I'll give them that. While being forced to leave Middle Earth at the threat of fading away may sound like a terrible fate, it is indeed a good ending for elven kind. As immortal beings that desperately grasp at the past, elves typically reject the types of change that come with the passing of time. Again, patently false. This is an oversimplification of what Tolkien wrote. Okay, let's break it down. Okay, um, first of all, the elves are not immortal. Let's clear that up out of the way. And this is why in another video I asked if you guys want me to do some videos about the actual lore and what's actually written. The elves are not flat out immortal in the way that we think of immortal, i.e., that they just go on forever. Okay. The elves have two parts to the elves. There's they're fair, okay, which F-E with the umlauts over it, A-R, fair, and they're Hror. It's H-R-O with the umlauts, A-R, Hrar, okay? Body and spirit, okay? The reason why the elves fade and why they will always fade, regardless of rings of power or not, is because their spirit consumes their body. And I know using the word consume sounds kind of harsh, but in other words, it's like their spirit is charged by their battery, by their battery, by their body, which is sort of like a battery. But slowly over time, it's gonna wear down. Okay, so their spirits, are powered by their bodies. Their bodies age slowly, okay, but they do in fact age. Actually, they age at two separate rates. If you read the Silmarillion and some of the other books in the Legendarium, actually Tolkien breaks down the rates at which elves age and stuff, and this is how we have an idea of how old Galadriel is or Elrond is. Um, Generally, from birth till they're 18 for women, 21 for male elves. They age much like a human, okay, year for year sort of comparison, with the effects on their physical form being roughly what you would expect. An 18-year-old human girl and an 18-year-old elven girl roughly would be, with the exception of like the physical ears and stuff like that, would be roughly similar in their development. Okay, for men it was 21, for male elves it was 21. After that, though, they sort of switch over to this way, 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 way slowed down way of aging. Okay, and I think and Tolkien had to redo the math several times on this to make things sort of line up and make sense. But ultimately, what it comes down to, and I would have to look, I have it, it's in one of the books I have back here, the actual math that he used. But ultimately, I think it comes down to it's a ratio of 144 to 1. Okay. And what I mean by that is humans would age 144 years for one elf year. So think about that. Think about you're 21 and you go from being 21 to 165 for a human. But for an elf, that's just going from 21 to 22. Okay. It's 144 to 1 ratio. Okay. So they were always gonna fade. It was just going to take a ridiculously long time. So saying that they only fade because of the rings is disingenuous. It's playing fast and loose because the two things are separated. Okay. Elves elves will fade regardless of whether the rings exist or not. Now, can the rings delay this even further? I guess they could on some level, but it's going to happen regardless. So that's not the reason why the elves fade. Has nothing to do with the rings. Blah 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 blah. While being for may sound like a terrible fate, it is indeed a good ending for elven kind as immortal beings. Okay, they don't resist change that come with the passing of time. That is not true. The elves are all about not resisting change with the passing of time, but keeping things preserved in their current state of in their eyes a sort of semi perfection, the way God created it. Okay, that's why they love the forest and the trees, and they're real big on protecting the earth. Okay, because it's not that they're afraid of change that comes with the passing of time. They're trying to stave off decay that comes with the passing of time. Okay, and things withering that comes with the passing of time. There's a big difference there. It's very subtle, but it's a big difference. Okay, one is I don't like change. Okay, which is a typical thing for 2022 politics. Oh, that's not so cool. You don't like change, but we need change because change is great. It's not what the elves are about. The elves are about like, hey, you know, God created the forest. Let's protect the forest, which is also kind of a 2022 concept if you think about it. But we won't phrase it that way because that's giving Tolkien too much credit. Anyway, however, the destruction of the One Ring and the inevitability of their impending deaths forces the elves to accept that change must come at some point and that their time on Middle Earth has come to a close. While the elves represented Middle Earth's past, no, The future of Middle Earth lies in the hands of mortal men. While they desperately fought to preserve their way of life in the Second Age, the destruction of the One Ring allowed the elves to accept their fate and to find peace after centuries of keeping evil at bay. While the elves of the Lord of the Rings of Power, are immune to the passing of time, again, not true. They are not immune to the passing of time. It just takes a lot longer for it to have any effect on them. They cannot deny change forever. Their time in Middle Earth is limited, yes, from the get go. And while the three elven rings delays the inevitable, their time to leave Middle Earth will eventually come to pass. That is true, with or without the rings, not because of them. With Sauron defeated for good and Middle Earth no longer in need of their defense, the elves can return to their homeland of Valinor. Again, not true. It has nothing to do with defeating Sauron or defending Middle Earth. It was built into the system. Okay, much like in the real world, we say death and taxes are the only guarantees. The elves fading was always a guarantee. It was built into the system. Again, you have to read the Silmarillion to understand their fair and their hrar, and how their spirit uses their body as a source to keep going. Okay, and when the elves fade, it's not like they just turn to dust and blow away and that's the end of it. No, when the elves fade, they just become disembodied. They are a spirit that's forced to linger. Okay, um, and that to them is a horrible ending. Okay, that's why they fear the fading, and they don't want to fade, is because it's almost like what we would consider being stuck in limbo or in purgatory. Okay, you're not alive, you're not dead, you're just sort of this disembodied spirit that can't interact with the world in any way. That's what they don't want. So, embracing the passing of time and the peace that follows war. Though it will be centuries before they can return home for good, the events of the Lord of the Rings of Power, set the elves on the road to their eventual happy ending. Okay, so this article is trying to imply that it's because the rings and their mithril and the way they preserve stuff, and that's why the elves leave at in the fourth age. Yes, that was sarcasm. Um, and again, like I said, that is not the case. The elves were always going to fade whether rings were created or not. Okay. Do the elven rings sort of delay that? I suppose you more in the books. You see the effect more on Lothlorien and Rivendell. Okay, and I guess to some extent on Galadriel and Elrond. Okay, but the other elves who you know don't have the ring and who don't live in those places, the ring is not affecting them in any way, shape, or form. It's not like the mere ring's existence suddenly grants all the elves, they don't have to worry about fading, which is sort of what the show implies with the mithril and stuff like that. It's just like, oh, well, now that we've got these three rings, elves everywhere are suddenly now immortal. And it's like, no, the elves were always going to fade. Um, the elven rings were the last rings created before the One Ring, not the first rings. Okay, um, their power was to preserve things. Okay, not that's why they don't make anybody invisible and stuff like that. Their power was preservation. Okay, this article tries to imply that there's other stuff going on here, and that somehow if the elves get to Valinor, that they're I don't know. It's just so weird. The Rings of Power explain a significant cause of the elves' exodus. The crafting of the three elven rings imbued with the power of Mithril. No. Halted the blight afflicting the tree of Valinor. No. And the inevitable fading of elvenkind. No. However, the destruction of the One Ring in the Third Age removed the magical safeguard. No. Elven rings would no longer hold their power. Yes. While the saving grace destroyed the tree, once more afflicted, the elves would be forced to leave Middle Earth for good upon the coming of the Fourth Age. Now, again, this is because a lot of the mainstream shill media and the showrunners have sort of, they either can't or won't acknowledge certain things, that the elves were always going to give up Middle Earth for men. That was always deigned as part of the plan. Okay, and if you read the Silmarillion, you'll know that the Valar are shown Eru Iluvatar's overall plan. They don't understand it. They don't understand it, and they don't understand what the end game is. But the Valar, okay, are shown how this all plays out. Okay, it's in the beginning in the Ainu Lindel, um, where Iluvatar, the one god, he does show the Valar the overall game plan, how this all plays itself out. Okay. Um, the elves were always going to have to step aside for the age of men. Remember, Tolkien wrote this in order to give England a sort of mythological tale of its own. It's not meant to be some other world and some other galaxy long ago, and galaxy far, far away. Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's not meant to be that. It's supposed to be Earth. It's supposed to be us here. It's supposed to be a lost prehistory to the British Isles, a mythology for the British Isles. So you would inevitably need the elves and magic and dragons and orcs to eventually fade or step aside for the age of men. Because otherwise the question would be, well, where the fuck are they? Okay. But again, these people don't take the bigger concepts that Tolkien put into his writings. They don't take them into account. So they just say things like, oh, yeah, the rings got mithril, and, that's what keeps the elves alive. And now that the rings are no more, the elves must die. And it's like, no, that's not it. Again, elven spirits are are kept going by the elven bodies. And again, this rate of decay adjusts as the elves age, but they do in fact age. Okay, it's one of the reasons why men are mortal and elves are not, or not considered mortal, is because the elves have this such a slowed down form of aging and decay. Okay, and then their spirits, when their body decays and can no longer function, their spirits go to the Hall of Mandos, where they are judged worthy or not worthy, and that literally just affects how long they have to stay in the Hall of Mandos, and then they are sent back. They are sent back. Whereas when men die, men, or I should say humans, we'll use men in the classic term, when men die, their spirits go to the Hall of Mandos and then go beyond. They literally leave Ea, which is the word for universe that Tolkien uses. They leave the universe as we know it. Where do they go? Nobody knows. Okay? Tolkien wrote the whole we don't know what happens after we die into the story. That's what drives the Numenorians to get jealous of the elves, because the elves can die and come back. And that's considered immortality. Whereas men, they die, their spirit goes beyond the universe and nobody knows where. So it's that unknown. Okay. So the elves, because of that, and like I said, because their spirit is sort of powered by their body, and their bodies age at such a slow rate, it's a sort of implied immortality, but it's not a real immortality. There's always going to be that fading, okay? And the reason why men's mortality is considered a gift is because men's spirit couldn't handle the heartbreak that comes with that sort of immortality, because men's spirit is different from elven spirit, and it would sort of drive you crazy if you had this sort of immortality, but everyone around you didn't. Okay, and so that's why men's mortality, men's ability for their spirit to go beyond the universe, is considered a gift. Except, of course, to men who think that the elves have it good. But again, the point I wanted to say was that it's articles like this where they sort of play fast and loose, literally with the title, and that's what jumped out at me, that the elves left in the fourth age. No, they left in the third age. They were one of the defining things that ends the third age and starts the fourth age, is the elves' departure at the end of the third age. So, I just wanted to point that out again. If you guys really want to check out a channel that really goes into the lore, like in depth, like he's really really good at it, check out Tolkien Untangled. He's a channel that I follow. Really good stuff there. But I just wanted to point this out because poor Emily Clute. Um, this article is just, there's a lot that you could point to that's just wrong. Okay. And a lot that's not explained, or some assumptions that she makes, or just she's getting some of it from the show as if that's the lore that they're supposed to be working with, and it's not. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like what I've said here, please give the video a like, share the video, hit the bell for notifications, but more importantly, please subscribe, because that helps the channel immensely. And I will talk to you guys on the next one. Peace.